Okay, hopefully it's working. Hi, this is TruePowerIsMine, and this is a special report. I have Brian Ellison on the line today. Brian is a activist, a humanitarian, all-around decent human being. He's also just recently started a YouTube channel. Brian, what is your YouTube page name?
It's real simple. It's just my name. It's Brian Ellison.
Brian Ellison, and I'll have a link for a link to his page in the description when I put this video together. So right off the bat, Brian, I know you're a libertarian, and I basically am one too. What are your thoughts on police overreach? I mean, not like as far as the shooting of unarmed citizens, but I'm talking about just simply going to a police station just to get a complaint form.
Yeah, I think that that becomes really a question of accountability, and some departments aren't horrible at it, and I've had kind of mixed experiences with it. But the biggest problem that I've noticed with kind of the idea of police accountability, and even when you file the complaint, everything that happens with that complaint becomes an internal investigation. And none of it is public record. So, in other words, nobody has any way of knowing what happened, if there was any discipline, if there was any follow-up. It just becomes, simply a, it just becomes like, you just have your own record. You made a complaint, and then if you want any information about it, you have to follow up. But you have no idea about the officer you're complaining about if they've had 100 other complaints on them.
How come it's not public record?
No transparency.
How come it's not a matter of public records? I mean, everything they do, except for like, say, undercover drug sting, I get that. But like interactions with the public should be a matter of public records.
So, and I think maybe it depends by state. I know that in the state of Michigan, when it comes to the Freedom of Information Act for the state, there's there's a lot of restrictions on what police information is actually available, and I've run into this problem myself in requesting different records, different disciplinary records and personnel records from law enforcement, and they claim these exemptions under the Freedom of Information Act, and so that's kind of the same thing. So those records of citizen complaint, because it's like an internal police record, you're not making a police report, because a police report is a public record.
Okay.
So you're making an internal complaint, and that becomes part of that officer's personnel record, which is protected information.
Wow.
So those type of complaints don't even follow the officers from one department to the next, and so it's really this kind of this fog over the whole system.
Yes.
And people just don't have any way of knowing, who the officers that they're dealing with, what issues that they've had in the past. It's really a pretty terrible system.
It's almost like the Catholic Church, how they would just take the bad priest or father and just move them to a smaller or bigger parish with no backstory. So that's why we have these same cops who get released from one precinct can pop up in another one and still continue their bad behavior, as it were. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And they a lot of times you'll just see them. They'll go from one municipality to another. So they'll just leave one, and a lot of that behavior is protected. So where they're facing discipline, they're allowed to resign instead of being terminated, and then they can, it helps them in the process of getting their next law enforcement job. And so they're just, for whatever reason, there's this desire within the law enforcement community to really protect each other much more than protecting the public that they pretend to protect.
The blue shield. Brian, if we could possibly get you into office, could you foresee, and this total hypothetical, question, could you foresee supporting a bill to allow prisoners to vote as long as they're American citizens, to vote while they're in jail, and then no longer hold back their ability to vote once they're released from jail?
I mean, certainly when they're released from jail, I feel like they should absolutely have their rights, all their rights restored. So I'm a huge supporter in that. As far as voting while they're in jail, I guess I really haven't given that much thought. And, but, there's so much of the population right now that's incarcerated.
Right.
I mean, that could be, an incredible swing on the vote.
Yes.
I suppose that the biggest arguments that they'd have is, somebody who's detained, who's locked up, do they really have an interest in who's in power? And I guess in a certain way, I suppose they do. They're not paying taxes, though. They're not, so, I guess I'm just kind of just off the cuff. I've never really given that much thought. But, I mean, I'm not a fan really of restricting rights under hardly any circumstances.
Right.
So, I think that's something I could get behind. I'd really have to give it more thought, but I think it's worth looking at.
Well, let's just go down that road just a little bit more, then we'll make another turn. Consider this. Consider draconian laws being perpetrated on a segment of population. Once they get incarcerated, now when they realize the ramification of these said laws, then they can mobilize to a certain degree the best they could behind confined situation. Like you said, it's like another check and balance to the power structure. Right now, there really is no check. If we don't basically lobby our legislators to basically vote a certain way, the corporate interest lobbies already have them paid off. And then when you find yourself in the mix, like for instance, you're aware about the Chinese drywall problem, right? A number of big homes, 5,000, 6,000 square feet home, all put together with this drywall that basically contains sulfur, so it's rotting out their wires, it's rotting out their AC units, it's totally devaluing these homes, okay? Now, our legislature is so slow to move on this issue. Now, we're talking about people, a lot of them that survived the 2008 with some retirement money. They invested in real estate, and now their investment's a total flop. And we have to see the corruption within the system. Not trying to tear down the system by no means, because when you look around, the other systems out there in the world aren't much better. But we can fix the American system if we work together.
Yeah, I think that the concept of, when you get tied up into the legal system, and then you start to really understand how it works, like you mentioned, I think that is a real eye opener. And it's a shame that for a lot of people that is too late at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think allowing them to participate again, I think that is, I think that's a good idea. I think anytime we put restrictions or limits on any right, and in this case a right to vote, I think it becomes kind of a sticking point of, well, where do you draw the line? Is it just when people are locked up in prison, or is it when people are locked up in prison or in jail? And if it's prison or jail, what about if they're on probation, or what if they're on bond, or what if, and then that line just becomes more and more restrictive, so that it becomes more of, you have to essentially earn a right to vote rather than it being more of an inherent right to have a voice.
I was just about to say, it's an inalienable right from God. So whether you're in jail, whether you're in prison, whether you're in the process of going to jail and or prison, you still have that inalienable right from God. And that should be a part of the rehabilitation process, is responsible voting behavior and habits. Because a lot of young men and women and older ones who find themselves facing said prison time probably aren't avid voters for a number of reasons, okay? For a number of reasons. Somehow, some way in this country, it seems like we lost the concept that our votes really do matter. We have fallen prey to the belief that the mechanical, computerized voting machines are all hacked. They already got the fix in. Well, I get it. But you know what, people? Let's make them work for it. Let's not just sit on our butts. Let's get out there and vote in force. I'm not telling you who to vote for, necessarily. But you should vote with your conscience, and you should vote with your self-interest at heart. All right? Don't follow just your union chief. Certainly don't follow just your boss. Follow what's best for you and your family. All right? and let's get people in legislating positions that will be an asset to the country, not just a bunch of greedy, corrupt politicians lining their pockets while we suffer the collective toll. Because, folks, we're, almost $22 trillion in debt? We're facing a trade war with China. We're facing basically a hot war in Europe. And as this as the cold comes in, in the northern hemisphere, oil prices goes up. People are going to be anxious. And, once again, either we stick together as Americans, United States citizens, or else we're going to be conquered. And it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. Brian, could you please tell the people what would happen if China basically called in the debt that we owe them or that they bought?
Well, I mean, in order to pay it back, we'd have to do, printing a ton of money, and obviously that's kind of a figurative term, but it would certainly lead to hyperinflation and the complete devaluation of the dollar, and anything that you had in savings would be worth nothing, and anything that you owned of any value could potentially, it would be to a point where you wouldn't be able to afford it, where your salary or your hourly pay wouldn't be able to afford your bills, and the government would have to raise the taxes so high that even if you own property, you wouldn't be able to keep it. And it just becomes such a massive collapse of the entire economy. And we've seen this. You've seen it in smaller, in smaller countries before, and certainly nothing on the scale of what would happen, if the Federal Reserve collapsed. But I think that scenario is really kind of inevitable unless we take proactive steps. And really, at this point, I think the only way to even deal with the debt is through some type of planned and structured bankruptcy process. And then we have to get back to actually spending money that we have, and get away from this concept of that we have an unlimited checkbook, and we can write whatever we want, and we'll worry about what future generation may or may not pay for it.
But you see, the only problem with that plan, though, Brian, the restructuring process, how are we still going to maintain our military dominance? Because I just don't see the rest of the world, while we're trying to restructure and redo our thing, just sit there twiddling their thumbs. I would see China, Russia, India, perhaps, definitely the European Union, deciding let's cut up America like a big pizza pie.
Well, I think that part of what makes that idea appealing to other nations is kind of the mindset and the attitude of the American people, and being just essentially, tax cattle, right? We are earners for the government, and because we're so we don't question how much we pay in taxes, and we just we're quote good citizens, and we let the government do what they want, and we just accept it. That makes us a nice juicy target for another government to come in and want to take over that kind of a population.
Yes.
And so I think that fundamentally there needs to be kind of a mind shift of look, we're not willing to give all our resources to the government because the government's irresponsible with it.
Right.
And when a population of people refuses to comply with the ridiculous request, I guess I would say, of a government, then it becomes a much less juicy target. There's not such an incentive for other foreign countries to come in and try and take over, because it's not something that would be worth their time to take over.
Gotcha.
The greatest resource of any country is the population, is the people. And so, we, as a free and independent people that refuse to be ruled and have rules imposed on us, that's really kind of the only way to ensure our freedom. And whether or not there's a Federal Reserve, or whether or not we have, deficit or a strong standing army, or the most powerful military in the world, none of that matters if ultimately we all, we're independent and free-minded and decided that we could think better for ourselves than the government could.
Wow. That's you're absolutely right. That's a very terrifying notion, because then basically the fix is already in. Any little crack in the armor there would be totally exploited by a foreign power. I mean, that brings me to basically how divided and damn near self-segregated rather, this country is becoming. You know, even on so many levels. You have the racial, you have the political, you have the sex now. You know, Me Too, Black Lives Matter, and Trump supporters. All right, you have that cabal of basically thought that is, like you said, they're all each independent, and they all feel that their goal is worthy of achieving. But it's so like either this side of the fence or that side of the fence. Either you're with us or you're against us, and that's not the America. And I say America, I meant to say United States. That's not the United States that I grew up in. The United States I grew up in, you know, whether you want to call it brainwashing or not, it was about freedom. It was about having the freedom to do what you will within the boundaries of law. In other words, that means you can't go and rob from your neighbor. You can't go and harm your neighbor and none of that. But you can certainly go out in the backyard, plant yourself a few rows of crops, take a few animals out of the woods there for eating, cut down a few trees, let them get seasoned, use that for firewood in the winter. But a lot of that, I mean, for goodness sakes, I'm sure you heard of, I believe it's the state of Washington, basically making it illegal for people to collect runoff rainwater. And there's other states that are basically banning you from having basically your little garden in certain cities. So it's like, it almost seems as if we're being planned to be destroyed from like our own government.
Yeah, and it's obviously been kind of a progressive restriction of rights, and it's been over a number of years, and we just see more and more and more regulations. And I think a lot of that comes from just the fact that we have so many full-time legislatures, legislative bodies,
term limits.
Their term limits, and aside from term limits, less time sitting around and trying to come up with new laws. I mean, there's a lot of times where it feels like they're simply having solutions to problems that don't exist. And so you end up with every time there's this issue that pops up and the special interest group gets involved and they want a law passed, and I don't know the roots of the law that led to somebody saying you can't take the runoff water.
Right.
But maybe it has something to do with the streams were lower than average or something in the area, and so somebody saw a problem and just are trying to address the problem in an entirely wrong way.
Yes. And
you should certainly have the right to water that comes onto your property. Nobody else can claim that they own it. And so, but again, you get to this issue of people just sitting around and saying, I can solve your problems for you. I'm the government. Vote for me, and we're going to pass laws, and we're going to make your life better. And ultimately, what we see over time is things just get worse.
Right.
The government grows, the debt grows, the amount of services that the government provides and that people rely on, that grows. And so you get a less independence and more dependence. And it leads to a lot of unhappiness. I mean, people ultimately want choice. And the more government is in their life, the less choice they have.
By default. And now, going down that road, as automation gets more prolific in this country, all right, when we finally hit a day where you walk into your local McDonald's or perhaps Burger King or even Dairy Queen, and there's just a kiosk to greet you, and you punch in your order, and literally behind the wall there's a robot making the burgers, cooking the fries, putting together the milkshake. All right. When automation hits that point, as a legislator, potentially, would you see a need to finally legislate a law or enact a law stating that all American citizens, United States citizens, gets a base standard of living pay, just to cover their bills and their rent or whatnot? And then anything above that, if they can find a job, they go out and get it. Because there's going to be a certain point in time where most of the jobs, if not all the manual jobs, will be utilizing robots either as a strength multiplier for one worker or just the robot does the job itself.
Well, if you just kind of project forward where we're at right now and where we've kind of been going over the last several years and decades, the difference in the income gap has just gotten incredibly, it's huge. And I mean, I remember even just like 10 years, it was like talking about the 1%, and now it's talking about the 1/10 of 1%. And it's, you have, if we start, that becomes such a reliance on government. I mean, there's certainly an argument to be made about a universal base income, and I think that there's benefits to that would help to correct some of the problems with the current system of the welfare system through different state programs. But I think, again, that just creates this reliance on the government, and where if you're relying on the government to provide you with something, you're going to get whatever you're getting that the government's providing is going to be of a lesser quality, and there's not going to be competition. So if everybody everybody gets the same amount of money to start with, now the economy, I mean, seems like basic economics. You flood the market with resources in the terms of whether it's dollars or whatever it is at that point. It just makes the cost of goods and services go up. And so I think that ultimately cutting down the government, getting government out of controlled monopolies, not allowing corporations to influence government as much as it does, and getting back to limiting the powers of government, I think that's really the way to deal with it. And then when we get to a point of automation, people won't need to work as much. I mean, you won't need to work as much to provide for your family if you were not working so much to provide for the government that is providing for the wealthy. If that makes sense.
Oh, crystal clear. We don't really want to talk about welfare for the wealthy because that could get us in trouble. We could be banned. As long as we point our fingers at the poor people that have no power, we can talk about them all day, but you're absolutely correct. But my only problem is we don't get this social thing under control. Say a society like China, basically, a communist/capitalist situation now, then they can overtake us as far as production and military. If that occurs, then we're in a very, precarious spot with all the debt, with all the social upheaval. People are scared. And the reality, though, about the economics of the situation, it would actually stabilize the economy. Meaning that, yes, you would flood the market with dollars or credits that these people did not earn. But the dollars and credits are not based on anything except for potential of future labor and future profit off of said labor. We need to do away with that so generations to come are not bound by poor decisions of our generation. Also, it would stabilize the economy, and unfortunately, if something radical like that was to occur, at the same time as giving everyone basically some sort of resources to live on, then we also have to, and I hate to say it, regulate how much you can charge for a candy bar or toilet paper or all that. Or else, like you said, if vendors know that people have all this liquidable cash on suddenly, that toilet paper, instead of $4 or $5, it's going to be $20, $30. So we had to put in economic laws, not to restrict your what you want to buy, by no means, but to restrict greed on the vendor's side to where they cannot price gouge. Sort of like what we see after a major hurricane hits the southern region, like Florida. As soon as those people try to get up in Georgia and Alabama to escape, all those little restaurants along the way, that hamburger that should only cost $4, oh, it's $12 now. That hotel room that should cost like $35, oh, it's $200 now. So we see price gouging locally, but to stop that, we would have to enact economic laws. And I know that kind of goes against our psyche about the free enterprise system. But unfortunately, folks, we don't have a free enterprise system now. A lot of the corporations, major corporations, get lavish government subsidies, lavish tax breaks, lavish local incentives to move their operations there. That's not free enterprise by no means. It's crony capitalism. So we need to recognize what we're dealing with, recognize our position in the system, and then not think selfishly now, but be humble and honest and think what is in the best interest for all of humanity.
And I think that, anytime we're talking about a government solution, and part of the solution includes, aside from adding more government to create the solution, then we have to add more government to offset the damage that we may have created. I think that that's an incredibly slippery slope.
Yes.
And I think that, really the focus and the way we should be thinking about it is, limiting the power of the government and how we can get the government to, like you said, you have governments that say, well, you can't collect rainwater. Well, then that means that if you want water, you've got to pay for it.
Yes.
And how do you get the water, and who do you pay for it from? You pay for it from the government, who controls the infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's anytime you have governments limiting your ability, whether it's, you have to get permission if you want to hunt, you have to get permission if you want to fish, you have to get permission if you want to grow food, you have to get permission and if you want to build a house, if you build a house, you have to build it according to the government's rules, and all these rules just add to an increase in cost.
Yes.
And for anybody, for the consumer. And so if you can limit that, and you can allow people to make a choice to do something that's economically sound for them.
Yes.
And without the government interference, then people will have more of their own resources to deal with without having to rely on the government. And companies won't have to design things that are, compliant with ridiculous government regulation. And again, cost for goods and services can come down in those cases. And so, and you see that in industries that aren't regulated. If you look at something simple like a television,
mm-hmm.
I bought my first big screen TV. 2005, 2006, maybe. It might have been later than that. But I mean, it was like $2,500 for this 40-something inch. I don't know if it was plasma or LED, or I don't remember what it was. But now it's a couple $100 for a 42-inch TV,
right?
And it weighs 10 pounds. And that's an industry that's not. It doesn't have a lot of regulation. It's got a lot of competition and a lot of innovation, and that's where you see prices come down. And then you look at other industries where there is a lot of regulation and government oversight. You look at automobile industry. I mean, you just look at the type of quote safety devices that have been added to automobiles, and all of the stuff now that is incorporated in an automobile, where you used to be able to just it was very simple components, and we're talking obviously a long time ago, but it's become so complex through government regulations that, you and I struggle to buy a new car because they're so damn expensive.
Exactly.
And they're not even good cars.
Right. You're so right. It's called built-in obsolescence. Some brainiac, some egghead thought it's a great idea to have, to have stuff that's not reliable and it's not quality, but it's at top dollar. And that works for your investors and shareholders with preferred stocks and dividends. It doesn't work for the working man and woman out there relying on this automobile to get them 45 miles up the road one way so they can put in some work and come back home. And I think that's what we forget to realize. America or United States, I'm trying to get out of calling the United States America. The United States was founded on folks working together to build something greater than themselves, whether it was a small little village, which became a small little city, which became a medium city and a big city. That's how it was done. Yes, was there exploitation in the very beginning? Absolutely, unequivocally. And then where there were draconian laws to limit society's growth after said, emancipation, of course. Today, is it still out there? Yes, but not as rampant. We have to fix these social injustices, as they were, or traditional way of thinking, so we all can progress forward. And I'm not sitting here suggesting that people should be giving special rights or any special consideration. All I'm saying is that every citizen should realize that his or her freedom is directly tied to the freedom that is given to your fellow citizen, whether implied or actually in practice. In other words, if you see another citizen that was unarmed getting gunned down, you better think in the back of your head that could be you. That very well could be you. And also, as we move forward down this train wreck I see coming our way, one thing that, and I don't know if you're aware of this, but President Trump didn't elect to get us out of the North American Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, or not NAFTA, basically the North American Union, where it's basically Mexico, United States, and Canada together economically. Now, the only reason why I had a problem with that is that if the Mexicans coming up across the border illegally is an issue, right? How can they really be an issue politically if economically we're all tied? So in like an economic sense, Canada is no longer Canada. The USA is no longer USA, and Mexico is no longer Mexico. It's like one economic engine, as it were. So that makes me think that a lot of this immigrant whatever, it's just a bunch of hype. There's really no fangs behind it, because we know everything with fangs in the United States political arena equates to money. And if our money's all tied together, then really, it'll be like me leaving Missouri and going up to Michigan. I don't have to have a passport. I don't have to have a work visa. I can go up there with my corporation, do a couple of things, and come back. Well, apparently that's what they want for Canada, USA, and Mexico. What's your thought on that?
I mean, frankly, I'm an open borders person. I don't think that, living or being born on one side or the other of an imaginary line designated by government, I don't think that should in any way limit your economic potential or your right to travel and move freely and pursue your interests. And so, the problem is if you look at it right now, if you imagine it, we tend to focus on the United States as our collective. Right. And I think that's kind of one of the problems that we have, is that our main identity becomes as, citizens of the United States. And that's where we've chosen to draw our lines. And unfortunately, that puts a lot of centralized power in Washington, D.C., because everybody in this country identifies first as a citizen of the United States rather than as a citizen of the city that you live in, or
wow,
as a citizen of the state that you live in. And so we draw this imaginary border around the country, but we don't draw those same borders around the states and around the cities. And so if you think about it, if we took it to that level and we said, well, you know what, if having a border around our country makes sense, then doesn't it make sense that we should have a strong border around our state? And if that makes sense, doesn't it make sense that we should surround our counties, and then shouldn't we surround our cities? And so that you have all these multiple layers of secured borders where, you're not able to cross. And I think that if, we take for granted the ability, like you said, if you wanted to come up and visit Michigan, there's no border crossings other than your GPS would tell you that you just entered a new state.
Right.
And I think that we take that for granted. And I think that if we could imagine a world where we didn't take that for granted and where that was a big deal to go from one state to another, then we'd be like, this is crazy. This is ridiculous that it's, all we're trying to do is, I'm in Michigan. I just want to go down to Ohio. It only takes me an hour to drive there. And this is, and I got to answer a bunch of questions and go through this, and they got to, subject my vehicle to a search, and I have to get permission from the government in order to do it. And obviously that sounds ridiculous.
Yes.
And I think that kind of in the same way, crossing an international border to me seems kind of equally ridiculous. And I just think that having the ability to, look, if the best opportunity for me to get a job is in Mexico, then I should be able to go freely to Mexico and get a job and support my family. And I think vice versa. And I think that in a truly free market, if we're talking about free enterprise, where we're not talking about a system where somebody is coming into this country because this country offers them some economic benefit provided by taxpayers.
Yes.
If it was simply an economic benefit that exists as a condition of the free market, then you wouldn't have an issue of too many people coming here, because they would only come here where opportunity exists.
Right.
And so, again, I think we have an issue a problem that's created by government, in that they've established, again, we're talking about welfare programs, and when I say that, I'm using it as a very umbrella term.
Right.
I mean,
I got you.
I would consider public education to be a welfare.
It is.
But anytime we're looking at, this where they're coming to for an opportunity that exists at the burden of the taxpayers, I think it's a bad idea. And so I think those are the things that we need to look at, rather than, again, creating and increasing the size of government in order to keep people on their own side of the imaginary line.
As a potential legislator, and just use that mindset of yours, what is the benefit, Brian, to give foreigners all these goodies and incentives and health care, and not your own native population?
I mean, I don't think there's any benefit. I don't see.
So why did they do it?
Fundamentally, I don't. It's a broken system. I mean, again, if you look at something where, somebody as simple as, even if we're not looking at cash welfare benefits, or providing food as a benefit, or providing medical care. Again, just the fact that somebody can come here and enroll their children in school, that's something that we as taxpayers pay for, is the schools. And if we have people coming in, from other areas that are, benefiting from that, I think that the problem is, I don't think the government should really be providing any of this stuff. I don't think that a huge collective should all contribute to a pot, and then the government should choose how to dole it out. And so I certainly would never prioritize one group of people over another. And whether that was citizens or, immigrants, I just think that it shouldn't be provided to anybody. And so that's how, as a legislator, I would look at it, is I wouldn't be providing favor to anybody. I would be trying to, to cut the wasteful spending and fix programs where people can actually benefit, rather than it being used as a system of control.
Well, I got you, but unfortunately, though, because of the traditional history of America, if let's say that we took away all, government oversight on employers of who they hire, how they hire, all that, how much they pay. My question is, how do you then control employers who would, just actively discriminate? Let's just say I'm a Mormon employer. So now I will only hire Mormon males. No females, no minorities, none of that. How would you deal with, huge corporations that would engage in that type of activity?
Well, unions were actually really effective at dealing with those kind of issues. And historically, it was, when the unions were organized strong, the corporations would use the government to break the unions. And we kind of see that happening today. And unions kind of have, they serve a great function originally. Mm-hmm. And they've become these kind of perverted bureaucracies at this point.
Yes.
And more of like political action committees than they are advocates for the workers. But I think that if you take away, again, that concept of using a group to, as a form of control through government, if a union was independent of government and the corporation was independent of government, then the union would organize and would have just as much bargaining power as the corporation does. And so I think that that's kind of a voluntary solution where people get together and they're forming their own collective that they choose to be a part of, and that they use that to negotiate with the owner for fair wages or fair labor practices. And then, the other thing is if it's an issue of discrimination, companies won't tend to do things like that in a free market because it really impacts their ability to compete. And so if you have a company that is known to only hire, white males, and they could be very successful in a community that is comprised of only white males.
Right.
But in a mixed community, they're going to have a real hard time being competitive because somebody else will open up a business that's doing the same thing and that hires, people of any race and any gender to work, and that company will be more accepted in the free market, and people would even be willing to pay more for that company because of the fact that it's, people fundamentally want things to be fair, and they don't like seeing when people are treated unjustly. And so I think, again, if you try and involve the government to try and solve it and regulate it, I think that you're just asking for additional problems, and some of which I don't even think you can conceive of before they happen.
Exactly. And that's the problem with being mortals. And that's the problem I have with certain entities trying to act as if they're God. They think this thing through. Look at the medical experimentation that the United States citizenry has been subjected to ever since World War One. All right. So we got to understand that, when we're dealing with the system that we got going on right now, there's basically three facets. We have the lawmakers, we have the financiers, and then we have the business owners, the manufacturers. Okay. Those are the three powers. So we have to somehow, like right now, it seems like the bankers control the politicians, which the bankers also in a way control industry through loans and whatnot. So you got this wicked triangle up at top that has all the power. Don't forget now, this is why I always stress to people, we know we have problems in the United States, but these problems are political and there are political solutions. Because I have news for anybody. If you think that you're going to get a little militia together or some sort of street gang or some sort of secret organization and go against the United States military, you are suicidal, because that's what's going to happen to you. That's why I'm saying this should never devolve into some sort of armed revolt against our elected government. What should happen is a psychological revolution where we all get on page, where we all realize we're collectively in this together, irregardless of our personal, personal ideals of the way things should go. I think we all could come to the table and realize this is the way it has to go. If you like freedom, if you like independence, if you like a sense of dignity, because you cannot get those things, like Ryan has said, if the government is all powerful. Right now, unfortunately, there's nothing you do in your life that doesn't have some sort of attached government regulation. If you don't believe me, look at your mattress. There's tags all over it. Do not tear off, blah, blah, blah. Look at some of your appliances. They all has to basically accept different transmissions and all that. That's all regulated. That's all regulatory. And that does add an extra burden onto the manufacturer of said product, which is passed on to the consumer. Now, unfortunately, that leads me to another question. Do you think that we need to get out of this consumerism mindset as a people, Brian?
Well, I think that's, I think that the rampant consumerism is kind of a result of people, again, having a lack of having control over their own lives and wanting to have control over something. So what do they have control over? What they choose to purchase and how they choose to spend the little bit of money that they have left over. And so I think that's where, I think I'm certainly not a psychologist, but I think that there's something to that where, I know that when I'm unhappy, I've tended sometimes to try and buy happiness, right? Like, things aren't going well. I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy a new whatever. I remember one year for my birthday, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to get myself a new car because maybe that'll make me happy. And it didn't, right? It never does. But I think that's part of it. And so it's a matter of people feeling out of control. And the one thing they have control over is this little faction of their life where they're able to choose what clothes they buy and what movies they watch and what what electronics they buy and whether or not they have an iPhone or an Android and whether so there's all this. That's the little amount of choices that we really have left in our life. And
that's
so,
depressing.
I think that fundamentally a way to change that is to give people some actual real choice. But the other side to that is how this consumerism kind of happens is it's through the monetary system.
Yes.
People are in debt, and the only way that the debt exists is through, the Federal Reserve System and fiat currency.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that if you take anytime, if we can destroy that system, and that becomes, obviously one of my goals would be to see the Federal Reserve no longer exist. I think that solves a lot of those issues, and so that you're not just simply, working so that you can save your money to buy, the latest, the latest high-tech computer that comes out or whatever gadget that is popular at the time. I think that you would actually be able to earn money to buy things of actual value, and you'd have to do that because you wouldn't be able to buy things on credit the way you do now.
Right.
It would be a kind of a sound money system, and it would be much less. Right now, so much money in our economy is just based on. You just think on how much is based on advertising just for that competition. And I think that if we got back to more of a productive model, people would not have to work work 40, 50, 60 hours a week just in order to pay their mortgage. We would get to a point of kind of post-scarcity, of this artificial scarcity.
Yes.
And people could live an actual free life and actually be able to afford the things that they want and need.
And I loved how you said that, artificial scarcity, because that just ties into societal fear tactics. If we take a look at 9/11, which was a horrible, horrible day for this country, but look at how the government has basically came out the winner ideologically on that. Now they basically can wage war on anybody with impunity. They also can, just snatch up citizens because they feel that they are, some sort of terrorists or whatnot. And I'm all for that. I think that we shouldn't allow these people to run around here shooting our schools up. You shouldn't have these people on subways stabbing people and all that. Yes, if you ask me, I think murder is a domestic terror activity. Just killing another fellow citizen or fellow human being, no matter the country of origin, should be considered a terrorist act, and it should be taken quite seriously. Whenever this thing devolves into, like, even right now, if you go to certain rallies or whatever, whether it be Antifa or alt-right, you'll actually see people engaging in combative behavior, attacking one another, right? So what I'm ultimately saying is, similar to the Weimar Republic prior to the Nazis coming into power, all it takes for us to truly turn fascist, truly, folks, and please hear me, is for our stock market to crash. Once that happens, all bets are off. The lunatics come out of the shadows. They rally their troops, and it's over. It's over. Brian, I'm sure you're aware of back during the late 2000s, 2007, 2008, there was a number of videos on YouTube about FEMA camps. All right. They were showing, railroads, new trains being produced. At the end of the line, there's always some sort of, pole barn type building with ovens in it. Right. What do you think they were planning all that for?
I don't know. I try not to indulge in too much of those, and I hate to call them conspiracy theories because I know that comes with a negative connotation. And that's the way I mean it. Because there's so much of it. There's so many different rabbit holes you can go down when it comes to those things. And I think ultimately the government is prepared to deal with civil disobedience.
Mm-hmm.
So exactly what is in those, what's in the camps, I don't know if it matters so much as we understand the fact that they exist and that they're meant to be able to contain and control. And so, and it's kind of a scary thought, because it's how do you avoid it as a people and as a population, and how do you organize? We spend a lot of our time socializing on Facebook and creating our groups and socializing with like-minded people and learning from each other and thinking that we're organizing, and then something happens like what happened a couple days ago on Facebook, where they purged a bunch of pages that had millions of followers, and that were, it was obviously politically motivated, but things like Police to Police, Top Watch, Free Thought Project, things like those, and they take them down. And so we have to understand that something like Facebook is not ever a way that we would ever be able to organize any type of resistance, whether certainly not an armed resistance, but even just a philosophical resistance.
Wow. I was unaware of that. I heard about the purge on YouTube, but not on Facebook.
It just happened this week on, it was either Wednesday or Thursday that it happened. I think it was Thursday.
Was there any warning given?
It was. Oh, no. Nope. No, it was just a whole bunch of pages. There was a bunch of cop block pages and a lot of, liberty-leaning pages. And they took it down, said that they were essentially spreading fake news for profit.
What?
And I don't know if you're familiar with any of those pages, but Police to Police, that's not fake news. That's that's one of it was one of my favorite pages. The concept behind police accountability obviously is one thing that's really important to me, and it's one thing that I've staked a lot of my future on at this point. And so that's not political propaganda. I mean, that's just not a narrative that the mainstream wants anybody to hear.
Right.
So they end up saying, well, this is a page that is working for profit to spread political messages. Well, what the hell is the mainstream media?
Yeah.
Other than,
yes,
it's the same thing. They're just on a much larger scale. And so if you have a voice that doesn't fit within the mainstream narrative, you have to understand that you're not going to be able to organize and get people to listen to that voice on these conventional
platforms.
So, there's obviously
no, I mean, that's just so depressing, Brian, because it's truthful. That is so freaking depressing to think that the reason why the National Post Office Service, didn't make a Facebook for the nation, because I see now it's better to have these private companies have it. Heck, the American taxpayers will build the infrastructure for the internet all throughout the 80s, 70s, and 90s, but then we'll give it over to these private companies that we can shadowly run. And like you said, Brian, as soon as someone pops up, oh, this weasel has a good idea, whacking. It's like whack-a-mole. As soon as you pop up, bam, you get the ban hammer. Oh my gosh.
And then, to me, and the worst part of that is that you have people that don't understand how a company like Facebook or Twitter or Google, how they work so hand in hand with the government.
Yes.
It's essentially a quasi extension of the government that you have, but you have people saying, "Hey, Facebook is a private company; they can ban whoever they want." And that's not an infringement on freedom of speech. And the reality is that what it is. It is an infringement on freedom of speech. And if the government wasn't involved, and if there was, you have right now the government trying to tell Facebook about, regulating this fake news because of this narrative that the mainstream came out with after the 2016 election. And so, here they are under the guise of eliminating fake news. What they're doing is they're controlling political speech.
Right. I mean,
so
I'm not trying to break you off here at all, but as a citizen, don't you have the right to listen to fake news if you want to? Don't you have the right to be misinformed by someone other than their agents? Don't you have that right?
Absolutely, and that's where I think that this concept of Russian hackers influenced the 2016 election by posting ads on Facebook, and so now ads on Facebook need to be regulated. I think that is all it was all a farce. Like, it was all contrived in order to say, well, we had people putting out fake stories that influenced the election, and now we need to regulate that so that we can control, because that becomes a big threat to the system.
Yes.
I mean, as being a smaller, from the Libertarian Party, we have very few resources, and one of our best ways to reach people is through independent media and social media.
Well, they're shutting that down.
Control the social media. I'm sorry.
I said they're shutting that down, my friend. They're stifling their voice. What you just said, some agencies deciding what is fake news and what's best interest politically. So who are they to decide that certain messages should be heard and certain messages shouldn't? And why would they want to decide that? Oh, because it affects their power base, their legislators, their judges that are elected. See how this thing goes back to money and power yet again?
Absolutely. And so I'm sure you're familiar with kind of how the political system works now, and how when you have an election and you have, say, for instance, in Congress, and you just look at the race that I'm running in right now, we have the incumbent is a Republican who came up through the state legislature. He goes term limited out in the state legislature, and he was slotted for this position within in U.S. Congress. He moved to this area where the Republican Party propped him up, and they chose him to be the congressman in this area. They supported him in his primary, and when he won the primary, it's a gerrymandered district, and so he was the representative. And so what it was a small group of people within the Republican Party that chose who this representative would be. And that happens across the country. It happens everywhere. And so this never becomes an issue. And a grassroots candidate, or somebody who actually represents a change and a threat to the status quo, it's next to impossible for that person to get elected, to actually have a voice. And so it's, anytime we have like a threat from a third party, where you don't have one of the big, a Republican or a Democrat in charge that's pulling the strings, that becomes a threat, and they have to find a way to eliminate it. And the way they eliminate it is, well, we say that the Russians influenced the election, and now we can limit political speech, and we can cut out everybody who's saying anything that doesn't fit one of the two mainstream narratives.
Wow. There's your choice, folks. Brian broke it down, plain and simple. You either choose the blue assholes who don't give a fuck about you, or you choose the red assholes who don't give a fuck about you. But that's your two choices. Anybody in the middle, anyone moderate, truly, no, that's fake news. That's subversion. It's almost as if, and I hate to be, joking about this, but it's almost as if our government has been subverted.
It has been. I mean, it's certainly not of the people. Right? I mean, I guess if you say the government's been subverted, maybe you could argue, well, it hasn't. The government is still the same government that it's always been. It's the same people in charge, but it doesn't represent the people.
Right.
And frankly, in the system that it's set up in right now, it's impossible for it to represent the people.
Hey, just so that this channel doesn't get banned, I just want to say any views that have been expressed tonight are not necessarily the views of Special Report, even though I do agree with them wholeheartedly. But I just wanted to say that because, look, me and Brian are not talking about overthrowing our government. We're talking about fixing our government. It's almost as our government's on life support right now. Dude. And we know the Democratic doctor and the Republican doctor, they're both quacks. The specialists that they bring up are equally quacky. And we're like, no, we know solution. We know solution for old girl. All she needs is a good shot of freedom, and she'll be okay. And they're like, nope, more control, more regulations, more taxes. That's what she needs. We keep her going. But that's not sustainable. Freedom's sustainable, but not the nanny state, unfortunately. Because eventually the kids grow up and the nanny's no longer needed. But this nanny, whether you're grown or not, you will bow down to her. And that's wrong.
At least for now, right? And I think that, like you said, we're not talking about overthrowing. I think that and you mentioned it's unsustainable, and that's what eventually is going to happen, is that they're going to keep, in order to maintain control, they have to keep increasing the size of government, and as they increase the size of government, they're going to have to, increase the debt. And as we increase the debt, we've got the value, the dollar's going to get devalued, and eventually the economic and the monetary system is going to collapse. And when that happens, it's time to hit the reset button. And so I think it's just a matter of time. I wish I could predict the amount of time that it's going to happen. I thought we got real close about 10 years ago. And they managed to, wave the magic wand of the government. And, now we even forget how close we came. But, it's a matter of time. I mean, having $22 trillion in debt and that increasing on a very regular basis, it's not sustainable, and eventually people aren't going to put up with it, and our lenders aren't going to put up with it, and it's going to collapse under its own weight.
And what happens, Brian, when a country owes another country a debt, and said country wants that liquid, they want it to be, in liquidity? They basically have the international right of invasion, don't they?
I don't know. I don't know about calling it an international right. At least, from my philosophical standpoint, I don't know what those look like. But I think that anytime a creditor anybody who's issuing this country credit at this point should know better, right? And so I think that again, you're looking at something where ultimately, when you hit the reset button, all this quote loans and money and everything, it's all fake anyway, right? It never existed.
Right.
It's all this stuff that was written on a piece of paper, and nobody traded anything of any value to get it. And so, I think that I don't see there really being any real recourse. I don't know that a country would, if we had, if we said we don't have the resources to pay you, and we hereby declare bankruptcy on you, and you're not going to collect any money from us. I don't know what that looks like, or how they would collect. I would be interested to see how it played out.
I think I know how it would look like. I think I would see a bunch of Russian and Chinese subs amassing off of either coast. I think I would see a bunch of missiles coming inbound, because look, countries have been destroyed for lust. Look at some of the activities of the IMF, how they go in, basically privatize all the resources, and then they'll set up little regional warlords and have the people infight and just keep it going on for hundreds of years. That could very well happen here as well. Because don't forget, America is still a new world type of institution. It doesn't have thousands of years behind it. It doesn't have all the culture and all the blah, blah, blah. All we really have is each other. And this ideal of freedom, this ideal of government staying out of your affairs, not being dragged off to the goulash. That's all we have. And even that's being debased by all this wicked social engineering going on. You're not American, you're a woman. No, you're not American, you're a this, you're a that. No, you're not this. You got to realize, if you do not have rights in this country, then tell me what country you do have rights in. And that should be your loyalty base. Because right now, it's not that I have any problems with, like the open border thing. I just want to clarify this. I have zero problem with immigrants at all. I do have a problem with the government using tax dollars to bring said immigrants in to work for whatever reason, because we know good and well if we went to war for whatever reason with their homeland, they're not going to fight for us. And I know that, people are, oh, no, I know this one, they're in the military. I get it. Individually, sure, but collectively, no. And why would they? If you was in a foreign country working and all of a sudden they declared war on America, would you pick up arms in that country and come against us? So we really got to think this thing through. I wish this world didn't have borders at all. I wish we only had one global army that would actually, suppress child sex people. They would actually suppress corrupt governments. They would actually suppress evil warlords globally, and allow every human being on this planet to have a certain degree of destiny, certain degree of autonomy. If you decide to work hard or not, then you get rewarded based on that, not some sort of artificial deal. You go to this college, all right, we already got this military industrial job lined up for you in this research facility. That's BS. That's unsustainable. Because there's going to come a time where they're going to make a weapon so advanced, so efficient, that there won't be no need to develop anything else. Right now, they're working on the hive mind technology to basically swarm a bunch of drones and let them autonomously kill people. That's what they're working on. Now, why do you think they're working on that? It's not for liberty and freedom. It's for control and dominance. And it's not targeted towards any other country but this one. We better wake up, and we better wake up fast. Recess is over. It is truly game time. So, with that being said, I just want to say thank you, Brian. This has been a brilliant conversation. Very, very, we went to a lot of deep conversation, but hopefully we can have you back on later on. If you have time again. And always a pleasure talking to you, Brian. And once again, check out his YouTube, Brian Ellison, youtube.com, and I will have the links below. You have anything you want to say, Brian?
No, man, I really appreciate you having me on. It was a great discussion, and I look forward to the next one.
Thank you, brother. Take care.
Bye. We'll talk to you later.